name is Damien, I'm CEO of OpsMill, and in this video we're going to dive deeper into GraphQL. So if you haven't watched, there's another video that's more about introduction to GraphQL, suited for people that are really getting started. The goal of this video is to actually go a little deeper and explore some of the more advanced concepts. So I invite you to watch the other video that is in the comments if you're getting started. Otherwise, let's go. So the first thing I wanted to, if we start talking about more advanced concepts, in the previous video we talked about queries, for example. I'm actually gonna get some of them. We use one of, that I had previously. But let's say that I use this query here, and now if I wanted to start reusing this query, something we saw that last time, we have the ability, for example, to use filters. So that's something that we're already familiar with. Here I can say I want to access white, for example. But now if I actually wanted to use that more programmatically, I might want to add variables. So the way it works with variables is like filters, we actually define them at the level of the object that we query. The filters, we need to first define them at the top level. So let's say here, I'm gonna say I want a name. And we also need to define the type of the object. So this is actually completely up to me, but it has to start with a $sign because it's a variable. And here is a string that's defined by GraphQL itself, so that GraphQL actually makes sure that the variable that I provide is a string. And here it's in red because it's complaining that right now I do not have a variable defined in my query. So here, if I say my name is white, and then here is also complaining because it is never used. So now I need to actually replace white here with name. And now the error message disappeared. And basically I say that I need to declare my variable at the top, and I say I want to use them inside my query. So here, if I do that, then we see that we have the same. So we can pass, list of object, we can pass. If I wanted a list of string, for example, here now it's actually complaining that, and that's really the beauty of GraphQL, is because everything has a very strict schema. It knows that name value expect a string, not a list of string, which is actually what it's telling me here. So here in this case, I need to say I actually want values, which is another filter in Infrahub support. And now I have that. I'll just make it a plural because it's otherwise will be strange. And now it actually tells me like what I'm passing as a variable doesn't match because name doesn't exist. I need the names. And here, if I execute, it should actually tell me that. Oh, I'm actually surprised. It automatically understood that it was a list. So I guess that works, but ideally it should have been a list, and this way it should actually work better. I could say, for example, that if I wanted white and yellow, then that would work this way. So that was the first point about the variables. Now, if we explore deeper some other aspects, why we have this structure in GraphQL with edges and node and name and value is because we're actually exposing a lot of information through the GraphQL interface. So for example, for each attributes, we could just display the value, and I'll say in most cases that's what people want to access, but here we also have the information, for example, to understand if the name has been inherited. So we have all those additional properties that exist on all the attributes, all the relationship, and that's why we have such a nested structure, so that we can actually access all of that. In this case, looks like this one doesn't have that. That's interesting. But here, for example, if I query the isDefault, and I will have the information, I'll have. So if we go, for example, for value, it's not that. If I go with isDefault, here we can see that, for example, for this specific value, the value is not defined, which technically means that it's the default value. IsDefault is very important when we apply profile, but that's something we'll probably cover in in another video. But just to explain why we have this nested structure, we also have the ability to query, for example, some additional information about, let's say, for example, the permission. So based on the user that you're using, you will have the ability to query some specific permissions and understand like what is being accessed for this, what is required to access this specific object. So we really try to make the GraphQL API expose everything, all the information. That's why we have a slightly, what could appear as a slightly more complicated structure, but there's, I believe, some good reason for it. Now let's move to another concept, which I think is super interesting in GraphQL, is the concept of fragments. So for that, I'm going to assume that you're already familiar with the schema. You're already familiar with the concept of generics and nodes in Infrahub, which is a very important concept. So I'm going to go to the device. And here we know that in the current schema, the schema that we're using here, I'm actually gonna explore that. So if we go to a device and if we go to the schema of a device, what we see is that a device has a relationship to an interface component in a form of like here we're actually referencing the generic infra interface, and the generic infra interface has been implemented in multiple flavors. There's a layer 2, there's layer 3, there's lag layer 2, lag layer 3 in this specific schema. But what's interesting is in GraphQL, we have the ability to query all of them at once because we're actually using what we called the equivalent of a generic in GraphQL. So for example, here, if I go with the device, I will query the display table. I had a limit of 2 just to keep it simple. And here, if I query the interface, it will actually return me all type of objects by default. So here, for example, we always have this internal structure that we can call like, which is underscore type name, which actually tells us like what is the actual internal type of the object. What I can see here is that for my device, I have some interface that are layer 3, some interface that are layer 2, layer 3. So the benefit is that I can access both of them at the same time, but the other, the downside of that is I cannot, for example, if I go to my interface layer 3, I will have a list of IP addresses that are associated. But here, I will not be able to access that because only the attributes or the properties of the schema that are shared with those, basically that are part of infra interface, which is the generic schema, only those will be available. Interface, schema, interface L2. So here, if I go to infra interface, we see that we have the speed, the status, the role, the MTU. So all of those are shared and I can access them in what I was looking earlier. But if we actually look at the interface layer 2, this one also has now, for example, the LSAP priority. Those were not part of that, and they also have additional relationship like untagged VLAN and so on. So let's explore how we can actually explore that and query that through GraphQL using fragments. So here, as I mentioned, I will be able to access anything that is shared, anything that is part of the generic. That is going to work the same. But now if I want to access information that are specific on one of them, I will actually define that as that's a fragment. Here I say include in this query only for the object of type infra interface L2 this additional information. And then here, because it's a relationship, I actually just need to define it this way. But, and if I wanted to access information about some additional information for layer 3, then I could do so. So the query become slightly more complex, that's for sure. But it's actually very interesting to be able to, still have this ability to query all multiple objects or multiple time at once. And in a lot of cases, it's actually, if we don't care about if it's layer 2 interface or layer 3 interface, we just want to know if they're active or not. It's very convenient to be able to do that. But if we actually want to access sometimes some more specific information, we can do that too. And then here, so we can see this pretty complex query. It's going to return like all the information that I want. I see here from my layer 3 interface, I have access to all the IP address. And if I go to some of my layer 2 interface, I can also access the intact VLAN. And you can see that for each of them, the return value is actually structured. Like we don't necessarily see here that, those were requested through fragments. Like if we made a request just for the layer 2 interfaces, the output will be exactly the same. So it's also very convenient. So just before we close on this video, the last point I wanted to cover was how do we actually query GraphQL outside of the sandbox, which we call here. So if we go to, here I'm using an online version of Postman. The way it works is you have to query on whatever is the address /GraphQL, and it's technically a REST call. Like we actually make just a post query, and the payload needs to look like that. It needs to have query, a dictionary that contains query, and then we can send the query as a string. So it doesn't really matter if there's spaces or, if the query can be on one line or multiple line, but as long as it's properly serialized, then we'll be able to do that. And then if we send that, then we see here the result that will come back as data. And then we have info device and the count and the number. So if I wanted to, it's not super appropriate actually to do it this way. There's actually in Postman, there's a better way to do that, because we can just like use this GraphQL system. And in this case, I will be able to put my query here, and Postman is actually gonna like form the query automatically for me, and this way I don't have to manage. But in the background, what's gonna be sent is pretty much a dictionary like that. So that part is standard in some way. So here, for example, if I had some variable defined, I would be able to define it here as well. Like if I had name, like earlier about white, I would be able to do it this way. I don't have it here, so that's not gonna work. But if my query was in this case, so that's how you do GraphQL. And on Infrahub, if we want to query on different branches, then we need to query. We can either add the name of the branch as part of the URL itself. So here, for example, if I want to query on branch 3, I will be able to do that here. So if I wanted to query for built-in tag, I should have a different number of tags in this branch compared to the other branches. So if I query main, I can do that. I also have the ability to just pass the name of the branch as a URL parameter. So either way works. So here I can say I want the branch main, or I want branch 3. No, looks like that didn't work. So I guess branch 3 it is, then my bad on that. Here it's good. I'm actually at 6. So yeah, thanks for watching the video. Hopefully you get some good information and how you can explore GraphQL on your own. Thank you.